Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about rearranging and solving equations for a particular variable. So let's say we have the equation y equals a plus b plus c. Honestly, if they ask you to rearrange for b, you could do that. If they ask you to do it for c, you could do that. So that's what we're going to learn in this video. We're basically going to rewrite equations in terms of one variable. So this equation in terms of b would look like y minus a y minus c. So you're basically having the sort of like the arithmetic of the equation to be the same. So you still want b to be the same when y, a, and c are the same. You're just rearranging it so it's easier to solve. Sounds kind of confusing right now, but we're going to go right into it. So I'm going to start off with some pretty basic examples and then gradually move into harder ones. So if you're kind of well versed with the ones shown on the screen, then you might want to skip ahead, but otherwise let's get started. So we have the equation y equals 4x plus 5. Now, what we're going to first want to do is bring that x term to one side on its own. Now, why x? Because they're asking us to solve for x. If they were asking us to solve for another variable like b, which is not in this equation, then we would solve for b. So whatever term we're solving for is the one we want to bring alone. When I mean alone, I mean so y minus 5 is equal to x. I want it to be alone. I don't want it to be y equals x plus 5. So let's get started. First, we're going to want to kind of remove the 5 from the right side because we want the x to be alone. First, you have to tackle the terms after the 4x, and then you have to tackle the coefficient of the x. So first, let's tackle the 5. How do you remove 5? Well, you subtract 5, it'll make it 0. So let's subtract 5 from both sides. So it'll become y minus 5, which is equal to 4x, because positive 5 and negative 5 cancel out to be 0, and you don't need to write a plus 0 because it doesn't really make a difference. So now that we have y minus 5 is equal to 4x, we need to see what we can do to get rid of this 4 in front of the x. I'm going to write it over here. So y minus 5 is equal to 4x. What's one thing you can do to get rid of a 4? Well, you can divide by 4 because that'll produce 1. So if we multiply this by a fourth, it's technically the same as dividing it by 4, but it's easier to write. It'll cancel out to become x, and that's what we want. We want to cancel it out to become x all on its own. So let's multiply both sides by a fourth. So let's multiply this side by a fourth. So it'll become 1/4 y minus 5/4 equal to x. And that's your final answer. Right now we have x on the right-hand side, but it can always just become x equals 1/4 y minus 5/4. So it's technically just the same thing, just the fact that we have x on the right-hand side. So let's do our next example. Obviously, we want to solve for x as per the question. And first, we're going to want to get rid of this negative 2. To get rid of a negative 2, you add 2, and it'll produce 0. So we're going to add 2 to both sides. Let's add 2 here, and let's add 2 here. So we're going to get y plus 2 is equal to negative 3x. Now, let's rewrite this over here. So y plus 2 equals negative 3x. And what do we want to do? We want to get rid of this negative 3 in front of the x. Now, as I said before, in this equation, we can basically just multiply it by the reciprocal. So we can multiply it by a third. But if you notice, if we multiply this, you'll get negative x. We want positive x. So how do you make this positive x? You multiply it by negative 1/3. If you multiply by negative 1/3, this will give us x, which is what we want. So let's multiply both sides by negative 1/3. So it'll become negative 1/3 y minus 2/3, which is equal to x. And that's your final equation. So let's move on to the next example. Okay, so we have our next example over here. We have y equals 5x plus 3 all over 4. Now, we want to solve for x, like the question says. So we have to bring the x on its own. So here's our next step. Normally, when you have a denominator, the first thing you're going to want to do is get rid of that denominator so that you just have like one line of an equation, if that makes sense. So to get rid of this denominator, technically, if you think about it, to make 1/4, to get rid of that 4, you would multiply it by 4, because that would become 4 over 4, which is just equal to 1, and anything divided by 1 is just itself. So you can technically, what we're trying to do is make this denominator 1. So to make this denominator 1, we can multiply this whole side by 4, because the 4's would cancel and you would just be left with the numerator. So let's multiply both sides by 4. If we multiply both sides by 4, you'll see that we can get rid of that denominator. So let's do 4 times y, and then 4 over here. So we're going to get 4y equals 5x plus 3. We have 4y equals 5x plus 3. Now this is kind of like our previous equation, so or like the previous example. So we're going to want to remove this negative 3. To do that, you subtract 3 from both sides because positive 3 and negative 3 gives 0. So we have 4y minus 3 is equal to 5x. And now we want to get rid of this 5, so let's multiply by the reciprocal. We have positive 5 over here, so this can be positive, it'll stay the same. And let's multiply both sides by 1/5. So we'll get 4/5 y minus 3/5, which is equal to x, and that is our final answer. And let's move on to our next equation. Okay, so as you can see, we have a pretty complicated equation. We still want to solve for x, obviously, because that's what the question says. And as you can see, on the left-hand side, we have two terms. So we have 3y plus 5, and on the right-hand side, we have x over 2 minus 3. So let's work one by one. You're going to want to leave the left-hand side the same because our goal first is to make this x stand out by itself. So we want it to be alone. So first, as I said, you always want to get rid of the other terms on the right-hand side or on the side of the variable that you're trying to eliminate. So since x is over here on the right-hand side, we want to get rid of this term because it's another term that we just don't want to deal with. We want to remove it. So to remove negative 3, you add 3. So let's add 3 to both sides. So we'll get 3y plus 8. Why is it plus 8? Because we have a plus 5 here and a plus 3, so it's y equals, so it's 3y plus 8. Now we're going to press equals x over 2 because these two basically cancel each other out. So now that we're working with this equation over here, let's see what we want to do next. We want to get rid of this 2 because we want the x to stand by itself. To get rid of that 2 in the denominator, refer back to the third example where we multiplied it by 2 so that these would cancel. That's basically what we're going to do right now. So we're going to multiply both sides by 2. So you would get 6y plus 16. Now, this is where you have to be the most careful. It's not just multiplying the y term by 2. You also have to multiply the second term. So think of it as you're multiplying 2 times 3y plus 8. So you multiply it to the first term and to the second term, and any other terms that would possibly be there. In this case, they're not. So this would give 6y plus 16. That's the most important step. Whatever terms you have on the left is what you're going to apply it to. So we have 6y plus 16 equals x, and that is our final answer. Let's do one more example. So let's try our fifth example. Now we want to solve for c. Now, as you can see, we have 3 different variables in this equation, and we just want to solve for c. So our first priority is to bring c by itself. To bring c by itself, you have to first get rid of any other terms that might be there. Since this is the only term we have, we're good. Next step is to solve for the denominator. So let's get rid of this denominator. Like we did in the previous example, we're just going to want to multiply it by the same number so that they cancel out. Now, whatever you do to the right-hand side, you have to do to the left-hand side. So we're going to multiply the left-hand side by 2 as well. So we'll get 2a squared equals b plus c. Now it's pretty simple. What we want to do is bring c by itself. How do you get rid of this b? Well, you can subtract it by b. Now, normally we're used to subtracting 5 or 4 or 3 or like numbers, but today we're going to subtract a variable in this example. So let's subtract both sides by b. So we'll get 2a squared minus b equals c. And that is your final answer. Of course, this can always be written as c equals 2a squared minus b, and it'll always be the same. Now, I just want to mention that I did start a new discussion thread on my channel. So I think if you're using desktop, so I don't think it works on a mobile phone, but if you're using a desktop, then you can go to the discussion section of my channel and you can enter any questions you have in a thread. I've created like this kind of comment thread, and you can basically comment any math related questions you have and I'll answer them within 24 to 48 hours, but that may vary. But if you want to send me like a screenshot of the question because it has a diagram or something, then you can always do that and send it to the email, which is always linked below. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Comment down below any questions you may have. And always, so the questions in the discussion section can be anything that's math related. So it can be any level of math. I would recommend pre-algebra to algebra 1, geometry, and algebra 2. So it does not have to pertain to what I'm teaching in these videos, but you get the point. So that's it for today. Comment down below any questions and also any video recommendations.